We all need oil. Without this raw material, our lives would come to a standstill. Europeans alone use 2.5 billion litres a day. What almost no customer knows is that when it's pumped out of the ground, natural gas also escapes. Instead of using this precious resource, it's usually just burned off, wasted and allowed to escape into the atmosphere, where it helps to speed up climate change. Evidently, the oil companies only care about fast money. Every year, 400 million tonnes of greenhouse gases are released when the gas is burned off. That's as much as is emitted by all the cars in Germany, France and Great Britain put together. The oil companies do business at the expense of people and the environment. They do it in countries like Russia, Gabon and here in Nigeria.
The amount of carbon being pumped into the air, flare, this is gas that is being burned on daily basis, 24 hours, no stop. You can say that share is killing the community. You can say the temperature of heat.
The oil from Nigeria, for which so many greenhouse gases are released into the atmosphere, ends up in places like this. We're in Rotterdam Harbour. Europe's largest refinery is owned by Royal Dutch Shell. This multinational oil giant reported profits of 16 billion euros in 2010. Sonny Ofehe is from Nigeria. Because he was persecuted in his home country, he now lives in Rotterdam. He's been fighting against the gas flaring in his country for many years now.
Well, for every one of you who drive a car, who use the products from crude oil, one thing I want you to know is that for every gasoline, for every diesel that you pump, you must always remember where this diesel was extracted from. And you must know that the people from those communities are being affected.
The Niger Delta. Many international oil companies extract the black gold from the ground here. Gas flares burn above the villages day and night. Polluting carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere at huge cost to the people and the environment. This is happening even though gas flaring was banned here in 1984. When oil is extracted from the ground, natural gas also gets into the pipes. This impedes oil extraction because it raises the pressure in the oil pipelines. That means less oil flows, and that's why the gas is separated from the oil. In addition, toxic methane is leaking from these ancient pipes. Methane is 21 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Whatever is left in the pipes is simply burned off. We're in Irakan, in the west of the Niger Delta. Here we're meeting a man who's been documenting the consequences of gas flaring in his home country for years. The environmental activist Omar Barayan Efaturi knows where the gases are released into the atmosphere and who is responsible. In this case, it's the oil company Shell. Just a few hundred meters from the village, the flares are releasing toxic gases.
This is the first point. Then the second, look at the second point, is off, is put off now. The second one, that one is off now. So this is the first one. Sometimes they switch on the two at the same time. People dying on daily basis because of gas flare. Heat everywhere. No energy, no good road, no pipe-borne water, nothing has been done in the community. You can see everywhere bushy, and we have Shell operating our land for the past 30 years.
For decades, the oil companies have been blasting black soot into the atmosphere. Here, for example, it's Agip, one of Shell's partners in Nigeria. The black soot hangs in the sky like a tarred blanket, absorbing the sunlight. That causes the air to heat up. It's an important cause of rising global temperatures. The local effects are dead plants and arid earth. The soot clouds produce an oppressive heat, and the people wait in vain for rain.
We grow yam here because of the farm, the flare here, the yam doesn't grow again. The only one who can manage to grow now is cassava. Even though the cassava is no more productive, but there's nothing we can do than people manage it. You look at the palm trees, see the effect. You look very well. Also, some of them, as me to the other time, you look around, you see all of them around there are all dead.
But it's not just the heat and the carbon dioxide that are a problem. The fires also release nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, benzene and sulfur dioxide. All of them are very harmful to human health. We can only meet the people affected by the toxins secretly because the villages are strictly monitored. In order to find out more about the health effects, we make inquiries in a hospital in the affected area. Shell contributed to the building and equipment of the expensive private clinic. The head doctor, Azebi Korikie, treats many patients who are sick because of the toxic gases.
Although he has chronic respiratory disease, he presents with cough, difficulty with breathing. That is a result of the fact that he has been exposed to a lot of the hydrocarbons in the environment for a long time. So he presents with that respiratory tract infection. It's a chronic one. Even if you give treatment, like I said before, it's palliative. The symptoms are relieved, and after some time it comes back again. So this is a clear example of some of the problems we face in this environment as a result of the gas flaring.
In other words, the doctor can't cure the many sick people.
The impact of the people is that it causes a lot of problems. Basically, it causes respiratory tract infections, such as asthma, cancer of the lungs, bronchitis, pneumonia. It also causes skin cancer. Apart from that, it also has effect on women who are in the reproductive age group. It can cause congenital abnormalities of babies. When the mothers are pregnant, they could give birth to babies with birth defects. This baby was delivered on the 30th of July this year in this hospital. A direct consequence of the congenital effects from the mutants or irritants from the gas flaring in the environment. And this baby was so bad that died immediately after the baby was delivered.
So gas flares also threaten future generations. Benzene alters our DNA and carbon monoxide causes severe deformities. What does Shell, one of the main producers of the toxic gases, have to say about this?
We do not have any evidence of any such negative impact on the environment or on health. Several studies have been conducted external to Shell, independent of Shell, and they have not highlighted some of these sort of concerns.
Our inquiry revealed that Shell is mainly referring to the World Bank study of 1995. But that study didn't examine the health impact of the gas flares in sufficient detail. Shell subsequently commissioned its own study. Dr. Peterside was one of the scientists who worked on it. To this day, this study hasn't been published.
Exactly. The Niger Delta Environmental Survey was actually motivated and funded by Shell Petroleum Development Company of Nigeria. The survey revealed that there's a correlation, a very fundamental correlationship between gas flaring and obvious health problems in the area. These are fundamental findings of that survey, which we thought that by now Shell would have made public. But for not making it public, that means that there's something Shell is actually hiding.
There's more. Shell is defying the law. Gas flaring is illegal in Nigeria.
It was 2005, November. I think around 7th of November, that gas flaring is illegal. That Shell and all other companies operating in the land should stop gas flaring. But now, up to this moment, this is 2010, they are still operating. They are still flaring gas, of which is wrong. That is, the Shell has right over the federal government. They fail in their duty. Federal government fail in their duty.
The ruling was made by the Supreme Court in the Niger Delta. We want to know how it's possible for oil companies to continue breaking the law. We're meeting Senior Prosecutor and Justice Minister Osaji Oboyuwana.
So the oil companies have a powerful lobbying group that meets with legislators and the administrative cadre in charge of the NNPC, Nigeria National Petroleum Corporation, which is one of the agencies that are supposed to be, regulating their operations in this area. There cannot be an end to excuses as to, well, just give us a little more years and there are challenges and all of that, So they keep shifting it. Like I said, we are helpless.
The army is in charge in the oil drilling areas. The background is that the state of Nigeria has a stake in Shell Nigeria and gets 55% of the revenue. In return, the army protects the oil company's illegal activities. Total and Agip are also earning money through Shell's oil business. The entire country is tailored to exporting petroleum. Nigeria is dependent on the oil companies because 80% of the state's revenues come from these exports. It's mainly the central government in the capital that profits from this money. This way, Shell is able to supply the whole world with oil from the Niger Delta. Nobody asks if gas is being flared. The black soot is left behind and the black gold is shipped to Europe. Local politicians in the affected oil regions are demanding international environmental standards.
You must condemn the conduct of Shell, Agip, ELF and other operators here that are not operating according to internationally accepted standard. You must condemn it. They are your companies. They bring back the profits they make from our soil back home. And these profits, they are making it out of our own existence, out of our life. The 2, 3, 4, 5 years that is shortened from our life is being converted to profit, and they send it back home. And you receive them, you collect tax from them. I think that you must also protest against it. I think that you must also force them to do the proper thing in Africa, in Europe, wherever they operate.
Gas flaring is illegal in Europe and Nigeria. For decades, European states ignored the oil companies' practices even though they were damaging the climate. But at the end of 2009, the Nigerian farmers managed the unthinkable. Their lawsuit against Shell was accepted by the court in The Hague. Now there's an investigation against Royal Dutch Shell in the Netherlands. It's a political issue. That's why members of the Dutch Parliament travelled to the Niger Delta in December 2010. The Joint Task Force is in charge here. That's a special unit of the Nigerian government that protects the oil industry. The European politician's destination is one of Shell's gas flares in the Niger Delta. Environmental activist Sunny Ofehe is also here. An embassy representative has come to prevent the group from being arrested. One of the Dutch politicians, Sharon Gesthuizen, experiences for the first time what it means when gas is burned off.
Feel the heat now. It's tremendous, and it's very hard to imagine that this goes on day and night, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for years and years and years.
Even though the group is here on behalf of the Dutch government, they are arrested at the Shell flare by the Joint Task Force.
Continue to destroy their health, and they have to leave because they don't have any.
And we were there with the embassy vehicle, which was supposed to have immunity to arrests, even with a Dutch embassy official. But they defied that. I mean, they said we were not going anywhere. So they kept us for more than 4 hours. We left there almost midnight. You know, I wasn't disappointed, but I felt fulfilled that the mission was accomplished.
As the representative of the farmers who are bringing the action, Sunny Ofehe has managed to draw the attention of the European public to Shell's illegal practices. The Dutch Parliament in The Hague subpoenaed the oil company. Sunny Ofehe is the most important prosecution witness. Shell has a lot to lose. Member of Parliament, Sharon Gesthuizen, can confirm that gas is still being burned in Nigeria. Her party has demanded a public hearing.
Gesthuizen from the Socialist Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you both, of course, for coming.
Today, most of my community struggle with gas flaring. And I watch on the news all the time about people campaigning for a better climate. And I wonder why that campaign is not coming to the Niger Delta for an end to common gas flaring.
Shell denies any wrongdoing.
Let me start with dealing with the assertion that Shell applies lower standards in Africa. We do not.
The explanation is absurd.
The SPDC joint venture activities are actually quite similar to what we have in Gabon. The physical environments don't differ greatly. The operating procedures and practices are virtually identical. In Gabon, Shell is considered to be a good steward of the environment. The company's record on flaring and oil spills has created no material issues in the country or internationally, and we've been there for 50 years.
The catastrophic consequences for our climate are evidently irrelevant to Shell as long as nobody protests against them. In the past 10 years, around 1,500 billion cubic meters of gas were wasted by oil companies. Are the responsible politicians in Europe even aware of this? We made some inquiries at the German Ministry of the Environment, but our request for an interview was rejected. It's absurd. The gas that's wasted in this way could be used to supply the whole of Germany with electricity. Coal and nuclear power stations would become superfluous. Total is also involved in this dirty business. The company evidently doesn't want its customers to know because they won't make a statement on camera. Other appointments are more important. The French Ministry of the Environment is also keeping quiet. Measures against Total? The question is met with incomprehension, and anyway, we're told the EU is dealing with the issue. The ban on gas flares is obeyed in Europe. The European Commission has created a special new Directorate General just for climate protection issues.
In a world where energy is scarce, natural resources are scarce, this is an anomaly. And we have to create legal tools to make sure that these anomalies are taken out of production. Europe can only control the facilities on its territory. It can put requirements on the products that it is important. But these gas flaring facilities, they are linked to a production facility outside Europe. So there is almost no legal hook to take a company to court. And that is why we need international agreements.
Washington, D.C. This is where the World Bank has its headquarters. It is trying to push through international agreements in order to put an end to this waste. Funded by governments and oil companies, its brief is to make sure the gas is used more effectively in the future. The man overseeing the program, Bent Svensson, travels the world in an attempt to get all those responsible together to discuss the issue.
There's several new sources.
Gas flaring is a global problem. It emits CO2 emissions, quite a number, about 400 million tons a year. And it's a waste of energy. And this energy could be put into better use. The GDFR is facilitating between governments, companies, national oil companies. We don't have the funds to invest. We provide best practice advice, technical assistance, and we do not fund the project. There we rely on the national oil companies, the international oil companies, the governments.
The World Bank hasn't had much success yet. Our search for an oil company that is already acting in a way that protects our climate takes us to Ecuador. This small South American country has nationalized oil extraction and is putting an end to gas flaring. Manager Berend van den Berg has been commissioned by the Ecuadorian government to implement the project. Thomas Röhn is supporting him in this. His Finnish company is supplying the generators. Ecuador's oil deposits are in the Amazon. PetroAmazonas, the state-owned oil company, is doing everything it can to protect the environment. That's why the aim is to switch off the gas flares.
Yes.
Then it will give different emissions.
Well, but we have four. Those four are still burning crude oil right now.
Okay,
those are the ones that we are
yeah.
converting from crude oil to gas crude oil.
The Finnish company has developed special generators that turn the gas into electricity. It's a high-tech process that could be used around the world. Project manager Berend van den Berg grew up in the South American jungle and experienced firsthand how gas flares destroy the environment.
2 or 3 years ago, I was able to convince the government of Ecuador, the president, who was very, very conscious on the environment. He's also very conscious on the fact that, every dollar you got to spend it wisely. The Minister of Petroleum and Mines, and they said, we buy the idea, go for it and get it done. Just go and get it done and make sure that we optimize all this energy that we have, all this non-renewable energy that we have, and we've got to do a far better job than what they've done in the past in terms of this associated gas.
The private oil companies who used to run the sites left nothing but rubbish. They had to leave the country because of their disastrous environmental track record, a dire legacy.
We inherited the place that we just came from that was piled up with fuel, with lubricants, with chemicals. We had to dig into the ground, we had to clean it up, and then we had to take a bunch of generators that they bought that they never put into operation because they got scared because of this. They said, oops, that's not the way to go, and whatever we bought, let's just leave it sitting there. And then we had to fix it, we had to rehabilitate that area and put it into operation. That cost us millions of dollars.
PetroAmazonas has made the great leap. Old facilities are being modernized to make them more climate-friendly. The gas is now being put to good use. The new generators are portable and can be used in different locations. If the oil here were to run out, the machine could be moved to another oil source. the state is paying $150 million for the installation of the new generators. But it's worth it for the government.
Since we don't burn the gas, we have clear advantages. Instead of burning diesel or crude oil, we can use the gas. Beforehand, it was just released into the atmosphere. Petroamazonas now makes savings of $75 million a year. That means the $150 million investment will pay for itself in just 2 years. That's the economic component. But what's much more important to the government is that far fewer greenhouse gases are being emitted. We're improving our carbon emissions. We've already achieved important climate goals.
As a result of the new gas generators, Petroamazonas has reduced its greenhouse gas emissions so much that Ecuador will get CO2 certificates. CO2 certificates are issued by the United Nations for measures that result in a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. They can be sold at climate exchanges, an additional source of income. The percentage of gas in the oil pipelines fluctuates. When there's not much, the generators automatically switch to other fuels. Why are so few oil companies investing in this new technology?
It's resistant, I would say, in the industry. They are used to flare, and that's the easy way. It's the easy way out, just to flare it. Because if you're going to use the associated gas, it's an investment. And it becomes more complex, the whole power generation of the different facilities. So there is a resistance in the market.
The Ecuadorian model hasn't managed to establish itself elsewhere. That's proved by the American government's satellite data. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, monitors gas flares. The measurements show that every year around 400 million tons of greenhouse gases are released, despite serious consequences for our climate. NOAA has been providing independent data since 2002. Dr. Chris Elveridge, the head of the gas flaring program, is even finding new flares in Nigeria.
The gas flares are in here, and the red color means that that's a new flare in 2009. That was not there in year 2000. And so we could narrow that down and look at the last 3 years, and that's really the best way to find the new flares.
Satellites can't determine which companies are responsible for the gas flares.
We take data from a whole year, so we get an aggregate signal of the emissions that the satellite is observing. And so then we develop a calibration with the reference data that's been contributed by several companies, and there are also several countries that report their gas flaring on an annual basis.
The administration is dependent on the data from the culprits for precise calculations. In addition to Nigeria, Russia is one of the countries that burns vast quantities of gas.
Actually, we haven't received any reference data from inside of Russia. Most of our reference data is inside of Nigeria and a few other places. Of course, we'd be delighted to have reference data inside of Russia because we'd include it in our calibration.
Russia has good reason not to publish its data. The state hasn't ratified any international treaties to end gas flaring. Up until 2005, the government even denied that gas flaring took place. But it can't keep the dirty carbon emissions fully secret anymore. We set off in search of evidence and flew to Nizhnevartovsk in western Siberia. This is the center of Russian oil extraction. We can see flares everywhere. None of them display company names, but it proves that here too, the aim is to get petroleum out of the ground as quickly and cheaply as possible. But that's only possible if the gas is burned. After the collapse of the Eastern Bloc, much of Russia's manufacturing industry went bankrupt. Now dependent on oil exports, the country rapidly became the largest oil producer in the world. We went in search of the gas flare owners. On Samotlor oil field, we found TNK BP, the Russian branch of the British oil company. BP is a member of the World Bank Forum to reduce gas flaring. Is it possible that the company is violating its own environmental standards? We make inquiries with the BP headquarters in Moscow.
We've made a reduction of 97%, so you won't see any of our flares. It's not just TNK BP. Other oil companies are involved in this too, but I can't speak for our colleagues. We want to check his statement. We managed to meet a BP employee secretly on the Samotlor oil field. Our witness tells us about 10 large gas flares that are owned by TNK BP. He is outraged about the pollution. Only if the other natural gas sources were to dry up would oil companies start talking about using the gas they're currently burning. Even though he works on the oil field every day, he's never heard that the gas is being used. But BP told us that they burn almost no gas anymore. We ask again, is the gas being used for anything? That's happening near Nizhnevartovsk, at Samotlor oil field. Energy is obtained from the gas. A technology has been developed to capture the gas and divert it into a pipe that then runs to power stations.
Then the pipes to transport the gas would need to be laid when the company drills for oil.
Yes, that's done by the drills.
Is it really true that measures are being taken to use the gas when new drilling takes place? We pose as employees of an oil company at BP's oil field in Samotlor.
Six new extraction sites have been drilled. We're just installing the heavy drilling technology, which is dangerous. The extraction sites are under a lot of pressure. I can't let you through for work safety reasons.
What are the plans here for the future? Does BP only want to use the oil or the gas too?
No, we just drill for oil here.
What about the gas?
There's gas, but it doesn't get used.
How can that be? Not even the drilling manager knows anything about using the gas? BP is clearly spreading false information. We haven't managed to find modern facilities like the ones in Ecuador anywhere else. Pipes are only scrapped when they're completely rusted through. We decide to follow a lorry and arrive at the company that's in charge of modernising the old boreholes. To our surprise, we find evidence on a notice board that the company has developed a concept to use the gas.
We've developed a solution. We've been offering this project for the use of the gas for years now.
Then why are the gas flares still burning?
It's not a problem that can be solved quickly. First of all, we need a law making gas flaring illegal. We don't have that. It's just seen as a waste product. In the current situation, it's not something that can be sold. The oil companies can do with it what they want. There's no law.
Russia has plans to ban gas flaring in 2014. The Russian Energy Minister, Sergei Shmatko, has come for a friendly meeting with EU Commissioner Günther Oettinger in Berlin. They're making plans for the future of the Russian-European energy policies together. Are they planning to impose sanctions as punishment for gas flaring?
I don't think Berlin should issue sanctions to Moscow, even if we were to contemplate it. We don't have the tools. I don't like the word sanctions, but I love justice. Russia isn't just the world leader in gas flaring. It's also the world leader in oil extraction. We're the number one in the world.
Why can petrol obtained from gas-flared oil be sold here despite the EU ban?
We all have cars and we drive them around and fill them up. There's still no other option when it comes to individual mobility. I'm going to fly to Stuttgart later, and the plane uses kerosene. Container ships also use petrol. Oil is on the decline as an energy source for heat, but for mobility, for overland buses, trucks and ships, for planes and for cars, we still have several years left during which we'll need a constant supply of oil. We have to accept that other legislators, I'm not talking about worst-case countries like Venezuela and Libya, I'm talking about democratic or functioning states, haven't fully accepted our environmental standards yet. That's life.
Standards akzeptieren. So ist das Leben.
We would have loved to ask Energy Commissioner Oettinger about the environmental standards in Russia, but he wasn't available for further questions. It seems politicians too are primarily interested in oil, but that has devastating consequences for our climate. The heat is causing the permafrost to melt. Millions of tons of soot are being flung into the atmosphere and end up on the ice of the Arctic. The sunlight isn't being reflected by the ice anymore. The black soot particles absorb the sun's heat. That is causing the glaciers to melt. Scientists have found out that gas flaring is contributing to climate change in this way too. The layer of soot is 50% responsible for the warming of the Arctic. At the moment, the oil industry has failed to supply important information on just how many tons of black carbon is getting into the atmosphere via the flares. The Russian government isn't putting any pressure on the oil companies to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. Whether it's Rosneft, Total, BP or Shell, they're all allowed to burn off their gas. As a result of the collapse of its heavy industry, Russia has in fact reduced its overall carbon emissions. As a result, vast amounts of emission rights, CO2 certificates, have been freed up. The government can sell them on the international market. The flared Russian oil is exported to Europe. 1 litre in 3 at our pumps comes from Russia, so we're dependent on this oil pipeline. It ends in the PCK refinery in Germany. It's owned by the well-known oil companies Shell, BP and Rosneft. Gases are also produced when the oil is refined. They're only allowed to be burned in emergencies if it's necessary to relieve the pipes. After all, there are laws here that punish the emission of greenhouse gases. They work. Total's Leuna works have become one of the cleanest oil refining plants in Europe. The crude oil is turned into petrol here and the gas is used to make electricity. That has reduced the refinery's carbon emissions. The result has been that water vapour comes out of the chimney instead of a gas flare. and the laws will be further tightened in the future. That's good for our climate, but it's a location disadvantage for refineries.
If we have to fulfill further conditions by offsetting more carbon because of new targets in emission reductions that Germany and Europe want to implement in the next 20-30 years, then that'll be incredibly expensive for us, even though we're already producing under very much better conditions than other companies. We won't be so competitive anymore.
Leuna will probably have to start buying CO2 certificates in the future, from Russia for example. They have plenty of them and can sell their climate-harmful oil at the same time. Ian Craig, one of Shell's managers, doesn't have a problem with gas-flared oil from Russia.
Our influence on the whole of the Russian production market is fairly limited. We're not in partnership, and we're buying that crude as a commodity on the market.
Isn't the oil from Russia illegal because gas flaring is banned in Europe?
Yes, Europe has put in place legislation to control flaring in its own area. But you can apply the same analogy to anything. You import goods from China. What's China's policy on flaring and pollution? Should you ban everything from China? I think you have to look to persuade and provide encouragement. And I know that countries like Russia and Nigeria both have programs to reduce their flaring. It's the question of the time that they can achieve it in.
It's amazing how a company that makes billions with gas-flared oil won't take responsibility. Consumers have no choice. Even Sunny Offerhay has to fill up his car with petrol obtained from flared oil.
I'm running low on tank, and this is the first available tank station, so I have to buy fuel here. So it's Shell all the way. You can't avoid them.
Shell has been promising to put an end to gas flaring for more than a decade now. Many flares have allegedly already been turned off. While environmental activists in The Hague occupy Shell's company headquarters, the management decides to invest $100 billion into finding new oil deposits. Whether it will continue to release harmful greenhouse gases into the atmosphere will remain Shell's secret. It seems Shell likes to leave problem solving to the government. The company is an important taxpayer in the Netherlands. Maybe that's one reason why Shell hasn't been convicted on account of its gas flares yet.
Necessary now. Now it's necessary. Okay?
But we can stay on the street, it's public ground.
We're back in Nigeria. The country has experienced a lot of civil unrest since 1990. Time and again, the Nigerians risked their lives to rebel against the oil companies. In Ogoniland, they used weapons to force Shell to close many of its gas flares. The army currently has the upper hand again. Gas flaring continues wherever resistance isn't strong enough, and the companies won't stop at violence.
We have so many securities on ground. We have their soldiers. They used to guide the gas plant. They have the police dogs everywhere. They don't want to come in. If you come through the gate, they will allow you. At the end, you will be detained by JTF, Army, the Navies, and the Shell Police. So we have to come through the back because it is risky.
There are hundreds of troops and police roadblocks on the streets. Thousands of people have lost their lives in the conflict with the oil industry. The fear can be sensed everywhere. Nevertheless, we keep meeting people who are rebelling against the oil companies. These women are fighting Agip's gas flares.
is very, very illegal. But there's nothing we can do because the people that are supposed to talk to them have refused. They have bought them over and they support them. And the flaring is in the night, you cannot stay here. Only the noise from there.
They don't all allow themselves to be bought off. Some went to court to stop gas flaring. The sentences are minor and the consequences for those bringing the suits brutal. We heard about a village being destroyed. The inhabitants blame Shell for its destruction.
No youth group. We don't sign up for panel.
Government. Have you seen the one that? Eh? They cause havoc. Shame. Cause havoc. I pray for the masses. Okay.
Exposing the wickedness of the oil company.
In 2005, several of the villagers filed a lawsuit against Shell for gas flaring. This resulted in unrest in the village. Nobody could trust anybody anymore. The people started fighting against each other. Some were allegedly paid by Shell. One of the survivors tells his story.
Some group of persons saying Shell are doing something to some persons, Shell are bringing money, some people are not reacting, some people are not eating, they are doing this, they are doing that. So I was coming from Shell right of way. Suddenly the group of boys held me, say, cut his neck, cut his neck. On the way, the knife were coming straight to my hand. I shouted, Jesus. The hand went off.
The wealth from the oil isn't bringing Nigeria any happiness. Hardly anyone still has the courage to speak out. The people are forced to leave and the gas flares continue to burn, despite their illegality. What does Shell have to say about that? Why don't they adhere to the ban?
It's difficult for me to comment on what other people say. I can't.
Other people? This is the Supreme Court of Nigeria.
That's why I said we comply fully to the laws of the country. So as of now, we are fully compliant with all the laws in the country. So there's no law that we are violating. But when you mention people make comments, I'm not able to comment on what they say. But we're not in violation of any laws in Nigeria.
The representatives of the oil industry are evidently making their own laws. The World Bank, which has set itself the goal of reducing gas flaring, is showing a surprising degree of understanding for the behaviour of the oil industry.
You have flared gas because it's the low risk, low reward, but in the end of the day, the main benefits for the oil companies come from the oil, not from the gas. So if there's no profit in the gas, it just becomes kind of a nuisance. We cannot just live on the conviction that companies and markets will, voluntarily adapt to a loss-making proposition financially, just because it's good for the environment.
Gas flaring can only end when the gas that's currently being burned is sold off at a profit. But exporting it would be expensive and the Nigerians can't afford it. 70% of the people live below the poverty line. In the past, the land was fertile. Now, large tracts of the Niger Delta have been destroyed by gas flaring and oil contamination. The mangroves, a spawning ground for many fish and a carbon store, are dead. Nobody can live off fishing anymore. Many people have left the oil desert. Those who've been left behind have to be satisfied with dirty jobs. Some turn oil into petrol.
We can't die of hunger. That's why we decide to boil the oil so that we can eat. There's no job. If we see job, we will leave all these things that we are doing. We are not enjoying it. We are suffering from it. Our youth are dying. This oil is killing many of them.
There's no money in getting rid of this oil plague either. It's the fast money that counts. That's why Shell continues to rely on methods that harm the climate. Instead of removing the polluted earth, the oil is simply burned, and yet more vast quantities of greenhouse gases are released into the atmosphere. Serious fires are a frequent occurrence, during which gas flare facilities also sometimes explode.
The community was asleep and suddenly in the night there was an explosion. You know, stored gas, everything. There was an explosion and you can see the pipe, the thing was burning for 3 months. It kept burning.
Now, Shell has halted production and is selling the inactive gas flares as a success.
You can see that they have not reduced gas flare because let me tell you, if Shell was still producing here, if the Ogoni people had not said stop with force, I would have told you that you still see gas flaring. But this place is like this because they were forcibly stopped.
The oil companies are evidently not voluntarily going to do their part to prevent climate change. Only if they are forced to adhere to European environmental standards do we stand a chance of having a world without gas flaring.